The lights inside the auditorium shimmered softly against polished floors, but all of that beauty went unnoticed when Paolo Dickinson froze in the doorway. For a brief instant he stopped breathing. He had expected a quiet evening, an easy victory for his pride, yet the sight before him hit with a force he didn't anticipate. There she was, Mrs. Lila Bogan, a woman he once dismissed, underestimated, and walked away from without looking back. Tonight, she didn't resemble the person he remembered. Her posture carried confidence, her presence drew eyes without effort, and her calm radiated through the entire hall. But that wasn't what stopped him cold. At her right side stood Mr. Alfonso Wilkinson, steady and attentive, his hand hovering near her back in a protective, supportive way Paolo had never offered. And at her left side, holding tightly to her fingers, was little Mamie Reynolds, dressed in a soft cream-colored dress, looking up at Lila with the kind of affection Paolo had never earned. In that single moment, before a word was spoken, before the ceremony even truly began, Paolo understood something he was not prepared to face. Lila hadn't walked into this evening alone. She had walked in with a future he no longer belonged to. Have you ever worked so hard to rebuild your life that you almost forgot how much it once hurt, only for the past to show up at the exact moment you finally found peace? Have you ever stood in a room knowing you earned your place there, only to feel old memories tug at you the moment you saw someone who once made you doubt your worth? That was the quiet storm inside Lila's chest, because every viewer who has ever started over, healed in silence, or carried themselves through heartbreak understands this moment. You prepare yourself, you promise you're ready, yet something still shifts inside you when the person who once made you feel small suddenly appears in front of you, right when you've learned to stand tall. And for anyone who has found courage after loss or rebuilt their strength from the ground up, Lila's moment hits close to home. Long before this night, Lila had endured more than anyone in the room could guess. There were evenings when she cried quietly beside a crib while Paolo worked late and offered excuses instead of comfort. Nights when she questioned whether she mattered at all in a house filled with everything except affection. She carried the weight of loneliness heavier than most people realized, especially during the months when Mamie was small and she faced every challenge on her own. Leaving wasn't easy. Starting over was even harder. She stepped into a small apartment with nothing but determination, a child on her hip, and the belief that life still held a place for her. The silence in that new space wasn't empty. It became the canvas she used to rebuild herself. Day by day, she shaped a life rooted in purpose. She helped children learn to read. She supported women who felt unseen. She built a program that lifted families who needed strength the most. Piece by piece, she became a woman who stood on her own, not because she wanted to prove anything to Paolo, but because she needed to prove it to herself. Tonight was meant to honor that journey, her courage, her devotion, her heart. But Paolo didn't know any of this. He had no idea how much she had grown or what she had created. And that was why seeing Alfonso and Mamie at her side shook him so deeply. It was the silent truth staring him in the face. Lila had built a life far brighter than the one she left behind. What Paolo didn't realize, not yet, was that this night would open his eyes in ways he never expected. Every assumption he carried into the auditorium was about to crumble. He thought Lila would arrive quietly, sit alone, and slip through the evening unnoticed. He believed time had kept her in the same place where he left her. But he was wrong. Tonight would show him the woman she had become, the strength she cultivated, the love she allowed into her life after walking away from everything she once thought she needed. As the ceremony unfolded, he would learn more than he ever intended to face. He would see the truth about the choices he made and the life he gave up. And for anyone listening who's ever wondered if their growth would one day be seen, tonight is the moment where everything shifts. Before we continue, if moments like these speak to you, moments where strength quietly rises and life finally turns in your favor, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these powerful stories reach more people who need them. As the applause echoed faintly in the distance and guests continued to take their seats, Lila remained unaware of the storm building inside the man watching her from across the room. She wasn't focused on Paolo or the past or the weight of what this moment meant to him. Her attention was on Mamie's small hand wrapped around her fingers, on Alfonso's quiet support beside her, and on the stage where her name would soon be called. This night wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about honoring the woman she fought to become. And while Paolo stood frozen at the door, Lila stepped forward, ready for a future shaped by her own courage. Now, to understand the strength she carried into this night, and the reason Paolo's reaction shook him so deeply, we have to return to where everything began. Before their world changed in ways no one could have predicted, Lila Bogan met Paolo Dickinson at a charity auction. He was already becoming a name in business circles, admired for his swift mind and unflinching focus. Lila was different, warm without effort, attentive to small details others missed, quick with a laugh that eased tension. Their meeting felt like two pieces fitting together. Paolo admired her steadiness. She found his confidence magnetic. He introduced her to rooms she had never entered, took her to dinners where conversations moved at a brisk, assured pace, and spoke of plans that reached far into the future. She listened because she believed in the man who promised partnership, and because she wanted to be part of the life he envisioned. At first, his attention made her feel chosen. He sent thoughtful notes, brought flowers to her office, and made sure she felt acknowledged when they were out among acquaintances. She believed the life they were building would be anchored by mutual care rather than status. There was real tenderness in those early days, quiet evenings that felt intimate, shared jokes, and the sensation of being seen. Those memories later felt like fragments from a different life, but they were real enough to have taught her how it felt to be cherished. She clung to those early moments when the cracks first appeared, expecting them to be temporary rather than permanent. As Paolo's company grew, so did his world. Investors, media attention, and late-night strategy sessions filled his calendar. His name began appearing in industry pages, attached to words that suggested he was reshaping an entire field. The demands of success pulled him in directions Lila hadn't anticipated. Calls came at odd hours. Meetings stretched into dinners. Weekends were swallowed by planning for the next launch. His focus hardened into a rhythm that left little room for anything else. Lila watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and unease. She supported him through milestones and celebrated quietly when his work succeeded, even as she noticed less of the man she had loved. Invitations she hoped he would accept went unanswered. Conversations she tried to start often dissolved beneath the weight of his schedule. Little moments, shared coffee at dawn, an evening walk, fell away. To everyone else, Paolo was the composed leader who handled pressure with ease. At home, the same exterior translated into a consistent absence of attention. He did not lash out or humiliate her. Instead, he became someone who assumed his presence alone would be enough. Lila remained patient, convinced that growth had its toll and that one day they would return to each other. But with every accolade and every expansion, the distance grew longer and harder to bridge. The shift was subtle and relentless. Paolo did not announce his detachment. It arrived in missed phone calls, half-remembered promises, and an increasing inability to notice the small changes Lila made to brighten their home. Where there had once been shared laughter, silence took root. Routine replaced tenderness. When she tried to voice her loneliness, he deferred with explanations about busy seasons and pressing deadlines, phrases that numbed rather than soothed. Nights at the dinner table became solitary afternoons behind a polished exterior. In photographs, their smiles concealed the hollow that had settled between them. The most painful part was not that he withdrew. It was the way his neglect conveyed that her needs were an inconvenient interruption to his priorities. In the house filled with material signs of achievement, she felt unseen. When Lila learned she was expecting, she hoped the news would reintroduce closeness. For a few days, Paolo's demeanor shifted. He seemed lighter, more present, as if the prospect of becoming a father had softened his edges. They spoke of names and nursery plans with a gentle enthusiasm that reminded Lila of what had once been. But the reprieve did not last. The patterns returned, late nights, last-minute trips, and messages that hinted his mind was never fully at home. She found herself attending appointments alone more often than not, listening to a tiny heartbeat without his hand in hers. Simple preparations, folding tiny garments, assembling a crib, were carried out in a hush, with an undercurrent of longing for a partner who had drifted elsewhere in spirit. The labor came and Paolo appeared, offering the perfunctory support expected of a new father. He held his daughter for a brief time and then stepped away to take a call that couldn't wait. The ache of his absence during those first fragile hours etched itself into Lila's heart. She made a quiet vow while watching her newborn sleep. She would be present in a way Paolo had not been prepared to be. That promise would shape every decision she made when the truth later unfolded. The truth arrived without fanfare. One ordinary evening she reached for his tablet to check a recipe and a message lit up the screen, a private exchange not meant for her eyes. Miss Candace Spencer had written, thanking Paolo for a weekend trip and noting how rare it was to find someone who understood ambition so completely. The tone was intimate, composed, and self-assured in a way that made the hollow in Lila's chest widen. It explained the distance threaded through months and years. His attention had quietly been offered elsewhere. The discovery was not explosive. She did not fling accusations across a room or stage a confrontation. Instead, she sat at the table with the knowledge settling like a stone and listened to the silence fill the space where answers might have been. Candace's message changed the way Lila saw the life she had been living. It was not merely another woman's presence. It was the realization that her partnership had been overtaken by priorities that no longer included her. The awareness cut through the fog of denial that often surrounds long relationships. How easy it is to rationalize absence, to believe that love will return if only one holds steady. For Lila, that moment altered everything, not by breaking her but by freeing her from the pretense that she would be enough for a man who measured love in accomplishments rather than presence. Leaving was not a dramatic escape but a deliberate, composed decision. She packed carefully. What she took mattered. A few sets of clothes, essential documents, and mementos that held meaning for two people determined to begin again. She left a brief note, concise and clear, not bitter but resolute. Carrying her newborn into the car felt heavier and lighter at once. Heavier because it was the end of a certain life, lighter because it marked the start of another she would shape for herself and her child. The apartment she found was modest, above a small laundromat whose machines hummed like a steady companion. It lacked polish, but offered something the mansion never had, space to breathe. She positioned Mamie's crib near a window where morning light came in warm and honest. The rooms were small and the nights long, but Lila arranged their life with intention. She learned to stretch resources, to find solace in simple dinners and quiet playtimes, and to stitch small comforts into their routine. It was not an easy existence. There were moments of exhaustion. Worry about bills and the relentless task of parenting without a partner's steadying hand. Yet in those months she discovered a resilient center she had forgotten she possessed. Day by day she rebuilt more than shelter. She rebuilt a sense of self. She took up work that connected to others, taught children to read, and began organizing small gatherings that transformed lonely evenings into community. She watched Mamie grow into a bright and curious presence, her laughter filling rooms that had been quiet for too long. Lila learned to accept help, to ask for it when needed, and to celebrate small victories without waiting for external validation. What she lost in comfort she gained in clarity, a life arranged around presence, care, and attention. In the modest apartment, beneath the ordinary sounds of neighborhood life, Lila returned to herself, step by careful step, until the woman who later walked into the auditorium stood tall because she had chosen to stand that way. The shift in Lila's life didn't begin with a grand decision or an elaborate plan. It began on a quiet afternoon when her neighbor knocked on her door, asking for help. His son was struggling with reading, and the boy's frustration had started affecting his confidence at school. Lila invited him in, offered a gentle smile, and sat with him at her kitchen table. Within minutes she realized how naturally guidance flowed from her. She explained words patiently, celebrated every small win, and saw the boy's shoulders relax as the pressure he'd been carrying softened. That single moment opened something inside her. She saw how 1 hour of attention could reshape a child's belief in themselves. The boy began stopping by after school. He brought his workbook and an eagerness she hadn't expected. When his progress became noticeable, 2 more children from the building asked if she had time to help them too. Lila didn't hesitate. Her kitchen table became a little learning space, filled with laughter, penciled notes, and the unmistakable joy of children who finally felt capable. She hadn't set out to teach, she simply followed what felt right. But one child turned into several, and those children carried her name home to their parents with stories of how she made reading fun and less scary. Lila found her days filling with purpose. The more she taught, the more she felt her confidence quietly return, piece by piece, lesson by lesson. As more parents learned about Lila's willingness to help, her small tutoring sessions outgrew the kitchen table. A local librarian approached her one afternoon, saying she had heard wonderful things and wanted to offer space for her sessions in the children's corner. The opportunity felt unreal. Lila accepted with gratitude, and once she moved her sessions there, more children joined. She brought markers, colorful charts, and simple games to make learning feel comfortable instead of intimidating. Soon, what began as an informal arrangement became a structured reading circle. Lila guided small groups, created personalized exercises, and helped children who had been struggling for years finally catch up. She found herself waking up excited for the day ahead, preparing new activities, and thinking of creative ways to keep her students engaged. Parents thanked her with warm hugs, handwritten notes, and small homemade treats. Her involvement didn't stop there. After the reading circle's success, teachers from the neighborhood asked if she'd be willing to visit their classrooms. She accepted each invitation with humility. The schools she entered were modest, often lacking resources, but they were filled with children eager to learn. Lila's presence made a difference. She wasn't simply teaching, she was uplifting spirits. Children who once avoided reading began volunteering to read aloud. Mothers who had felt overlooked found encouragement and advice during informal conversations with her. Without realizing it, Lila was becoming a steady, reassuring figure in the community, someone people trusted. As her program expanded, Lila felt compelled to support not only children, but also the women around her. Many faced challenges similar to the ones she had experienced: loneliness, uncertainty, and the struggle to reclaim their identity after difficult relationships. She began organizing small gatherings at the library, inviting mothers to sit together, share their stories, and learn skills that would help them rebuild their confidence. What started as casual conversations eventually took shape as a structured support network. Lila introduced practical workshops, budgeting, stress management, home organization, and emotional wellness. She invited guest speakers when possible, but most of the time, she simply shared what she had learned through her own journey. Her sincerity made people feel safe. Women who had once kept silent began opening up. They laughed, cried, encouraged one another, and left each meeting feeling lighter. Lila never positioned herself as an expert. She was a companion, someone who had walked a difficult road and was willing to reach back and pull others forward. With each session, more women attended. Some brought friends, others offered to help with planning, and little by little the network grew into a vital resource for the community. Mamie grew up in the middle of this growing movement, surrounded by warmth and optimism. She spent afternoons sitting quietly beside groups of children or helping Lila pack supplies before their sessions. While Lila taught, Mamie often handed out stickers or organized the books on nearby shelves. Her tiny voice and bright eyes brought joy to every room they entered. The children adored her, and the mothers admired the way Lila balanced motherhood with her increasing responsibilities. Mamie's presence became part of the charm of the program. She watched her mother teach with admiration, learning from example what strength looked like. Lila wasn't perfect, but she was present, consistently, lovingly, without reservation. Their bond grew deeper through shared routines and small traditions. After each long day, Lila and Mamie would stop by a nearby bakery for a treat. They'd sit by the window, sharing pastries and exchanging stories. These simple moments became the highlights of their days, grounding their lives in gratitude rather than regret. As word spread, local organizers and community leaders took notice. They attended Lila's events, observed her teaching style, and saw how parents and children gravitated toward her. What impressed them most wasn't the scale of what she was doing, but the sincerity of her impact. Her program expanded beyond reading. She began collaborating with churches, after-school centers, and small nonprofits. She wasn't just helping children learn, she was helping families regain balance and hope. The community embraced her fully. People recommended her to friends, Schools requested her support. Mothers approached her for advice, grateful to have someone who understood their struggles. Lila didn't chase recognition. She didn't seek praise. Everything she did stemmed from compassion. Yet admiration grew naturally around her, wrapping her work in genuine appreciation. She could walk into any building in the neighborhood and be greeted with smiles, warm greetings, and eager hands ready to help her carry supplies. She didn't have much money, but she had influence, the kind earned through patience, service, and heart. Standing in the midst of all she had built, Lila often reflected on how far she had come. Her journey wasn't glamorous, and her progress wasn't instant. But as she looked around the library, the classrooms, and the community gatherings, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: fulfillment. She saw children flourishing because she helped them believe in themselves. She saw mothers gaining confidence because she reminded them of their worth, and she saw her daughter growing in a world shaped by care rather than neglect. Life wasn't perfect, but it was meaningful. She had created a space where kindness mattered more than prestige, where presence mattered more than appearance, and where effort was valued over perfection. Lila didn't realize it yet, but everything she was building would eventually lead to a moment where the entire city would stand and applaud her, a moment where her past and present would collide in a room filled with witnesses. A moment that would reveal just how deeply her quiet work had touched the lives of others. She wasn't just beginning again, she was rising. The first time Lila met Alfonso Wilkinson, she wasn't searching for help, companionship, or anything resembling a new beginning. She simply needed someone capable of repairing a damaged wall at the literacy center. The plaster had begun to crumble, leaving a small section unsafe for the children. A volunteer coordinator recommended Alfonso, saying he often offered his skills to community programs. Lila expected a straightforward repairman, quiet, in and out, polite enough but reserved. Instead, she met a man whose calm presence settled lightly into the room. He arrived with modest tools, easy manners, and a thoughtful smile. His voice carried a natural warmth that made even the simplest question feel considered. While examining the wall, he explained what needed to be done in clear terms without making her feel overwhelmed. Lila noticed the way he listened carefully whenever she spoke, as though she was worth his full attention. He didn't rush. He didn't overlook details. He treated the space and her with a care she had forgotten existed. What struck her most wasn't his skill, but his steadiness. There was no ego in the way he worked, no self-importance, no need to impress. He simply fixed what was broken and made sure she felt comfortable throughout the process. When he finished, he cleaned the area meticulously, thanked her for the opportunity, and left with a nod that lingered in her thoughts far longer than expected. A few days later, Alfonso returned, not because the wall needed more work, but because he noticed the bookshelves along the back corner sagging under the weight of donated books. He offered to reinforce them. Lila hadn't asked, but he stepped forward as though helping was the most natural thing in the world. His second visit lasted longer than the first. While securing the shelves, he asked her questions about the reading program, the children, and what inspired her to start the whole initiative. She spoke openly, surprised at how easily her words flowed around him. He wasn't intrusive, he simply listened with genuine interest. When Mamie wandered into the room holding a picture book, Alfonso paused his work and asked her about her favorite stories. Mamie, who was usually shy around unfamiliar adults, pointed shyly at the drawings. Alfonso smiled softly and complimented her choice in a way that made her beam. From then on, Alfonso began stopping by regularly, sometimes with wood to build new fixtures, sometimes with a stack of books he had picked up at a thrift shop, and sometimes just to check whether anything needed adjusting. Each time, he brought the same steady presence, unhurried, thoughtful, and quietly attentive. The center felt more grounded when he was there, and Lila found herself looking forward to his visits. What surprised her most was how easily Alfonso blended into her growing community. The children trusted him almost instantly, drawn to his gentle encouragement. He spoke to them with the same respect he offered adults, never talking down to them or making them feel small. He helped organize reading corners, moved furniture when needed, and always ensured the environment felt welcoming. Mamie adored him. She followed him around like a small shadow, handing him nails, screws, and tools she only half understood. He always thanked her as though she were performing an essential task, which made her glow with pride. Lila watched their interactions from a distance, realizing she hadn't seen Mamie connect with an adult male so comfortably before. There were moments, quiet, unintentional, when Lila would catch Alfonso glancing her way with a softness that made her heart quiver. Not romantic, not possessive, just appreciation. It had been so long since someone looked at her with that much sincerity that it made her breath hitch before she composed herself again. What she felt around him wasn't intensity. It wasn't the whirlwind she once mistook for love. It was gentler, slower, more grounded. It reminded her of steady rain rather than a storm, refreshing instead of consuming. Though Alfonso never pushed, it became clear he wasn't there solely for repairs. He stayed after finishing tasks, helping clean up books, move supplies, or entertain Mamie while Lila wrapped up paperwork. Their conversations deepened naturally. Sometimes they spoke about work, other times about life, childhood memories, or the challenges of finding one's place in the world. Alfonso never asked personal questions prematurely. He didn't probe into her past or hint at curiosity about her former marriage. He respected the invisible boundaries she carried. His patience was consistent, never shifting, never pressuring, never assuming. He became a steady figure in her weekly rhythm, someone she could depend on, someone who brought calm instead of chaos. The first time Alfonso stayed late enough to help lock up, Lila realized something had changed inside her without warning. When he handed her the keys with a small smile, she felt the faintest flutter, an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. She pushed it aside for the moment, but the warm echo remained. She didn't know it yet, but the quiet foundation of something meaningful was being built, slowly and intentionally, right beside her. As the months passed, their interactions began to carry a subtle familiarity. Alfonso started showing up at the center with things he thought might make her days easier. Snacks for the children, extra markers, storage bins, stacks of flashcards. He brought ideas too, creating a reading nook, adding more shelves, improving the lighting near the younger children's area. Each suggestion came with, "Only if you think it helps," never imposing, always considerate. Lila found herself laughing more whenever he was near. The ease between them felt natural, like something her spirit recognized long before her mind did. She noticed how he always positioned himself to help without taking over, how he listened before speaking, how he always greeted Mamie first with a gentle wave that made the little girl giggle. Whenever their hands brushed accidentally while organizing supplies, Lila would pause, not from discomfort, but from a feeling she couldn't quite name yet. There was no fear, no old wounds reopening, just warmth. She wasn't falling fast, she wasn't falling blindly. She was opening, carefully, steadily, with a sense of safety she had forgotten was possible. 3 months before the award ceremony, after a long day of preparing materials for a summer reading event, Alfonso lingered near the exit while Lila gathered her things. Mamie was already half asleep in her stroller. The room was quiet, washed in the soft glow of the late afternoon. Alfonso cleared his throat gently, then said, "They're honoring you soon, aren't they, for all the work you've done here?" Lila nodded, surprised he knew. He offered a humble, almost shy smile. "I was wondering," he continued, voice steady but warm, "if you'd allow me to walk with you that night. You've built something remarkable here, and I'd be honored to stand beside you when the community recognizes it." Lila froze, not out of hesitation, but from the sincerity of the gesture. No one had offered to accompany her in such an intentional, heartfelt way in years. It wasn't about appearances or prestige. It wasn't about being seen. Alfonso simply wanted to support her. She whispered yes, and his smile, quiet, relieved, and full of respect, was the beginning of a new chapter she didn't yet realize would change everything. The evening of the ceremony arrived with a gentle glow that settled over the city like a quiet promise. Lila stepped out of the car in a deep blue dress that flowed with every movement, elegant without trying, graceful without intention. She held Mamie's small hand, steadying the excited bounce in her daughter's steps. At her other side, Alfonso walked with the same quiet confidence he always carried, solid, calm, reassuring. Inside the auditorium, warm lights illuminated rows of guests in their finest attire. Conversations drifted through the air in soft waves, filled with anticipation for the award presentations. Lila inhaled slowly, surprised by the sense of peace she felt. Despite the significance of the night, she wasn't nervous, not with Mamie's fingers curled around hers, and not with Alfonso offering her a smile every time she glanced his way. "You're going to do wonderfully," he whispered, leaning just close enough for her to hear but not close enough to draw attention. His voice alone steadied her heartbeat. She smiled faintly. "I just hope I don't forget my speech. If you do, I'll be right here," he replied. "And besides, you've lived the words. That's what matters." Mamie tugged gently at her mother's hand. "Mommy, can we sit in the front?" Lila laughed softly. "We will, sweetheart." The three of them walked in together, a quiet picture of unity, unaware that eyes were already beginning to turn their way. A subtle shift rippled through the room when Paolo Dickinson entered the auditorium. He stood near the entrance for a moment, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, his expression cool and composed. Miss Candace Spencer walked beside him, radiant in an ivory gown that caught the light with every step she took. The couple drew attention easily. Paolo carried authority the way some people wear cologne, effortlessly, unmistakably. Yet the moment Paolo's gaze drifted across the crowd, something inside him halted. His eyes landed on Lila. He expected to see her alone. He expected to see her subdued, quiet, unchanged. He expected her presence to blend into the room the way it once did in their home. But instead, he saw her standing tall beside a man who exuded confidence without arrogance. A man clearly invested in her, a man who stayed close enough to protect her, yet far enough to respect her space. And at her side, holding her hand with innocent pride, was little Mamie, smiling as though the night belonged entirely to her mother. Paolo's steps faltered. He didn't hide the pause. He couldn't. Candace followed his gaze and recognized the woman immediately. She offered a controlled smile, but something in her posture shifted, a mix of curiosity and awareness. Lila, unaware of their entrance, continued talking to Alfonso as if the past had no place in her present, and that image alone unsettled Paolo far more than he expected. Eventually Paolo approached. He wore professionalism like armor, each step measured, each breath controlled. Lila turned as he neared, her expression composed. There was no tremor in her hands, no flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Lila," Paolo said with a polite nod, "congratulations on your nomination." "Thank you," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. A silence settled between them, not tense but revealing. Paolo studied her face, noting how much she had changed. There was a brightness there he didn't remember, a strength he didn't recognize, a sense of wholeness that no longer required anything from him. Candace stepped forward with a gentle smile. "You must be Mamie," she said softly, crouching slightly to meet the child's eyes. "You look lovely tonight." Mamie giggled shyly and leaned closer to Lila's side. Alfonso, who had remained quiet out of respect, placed a light hand behind Lila, not touching her, just close enough to show solidarity. Paolo's gaze flicked to him. Something unreadable crossed his features. Then he refocused on Lila, but this time, he looked at her differently, as though he was seeing her fully for the first time. And that realization unsettled him more than any business threat ever had. The ceremony began with applause echoing through the hall. Hosts introduced honorees one by one, sharing stories of resilience and community service. Lila listened attentively, occasionally squeezing Mamie's hand and smiling at Alfonso during particularly moving moments. But every so often she felt a heavy gaze from across the room. Paolo watched her, not with resentment, not with entitlement, but with something more fragile, something uncertain, something that hinted at regret he wasn't ready to confront. Candace noticed too. She placed a hand on his arm once, subtly guiding his attention back to the stage. Paolo nodded, pretending to refocus, but his eyes drifted back almost immediately. Lila didn't acknowledge it, not out of avoidance, out of growth. The past no longer dictated her reactions. She focused on the stories being shared, the accomplishments being honored, and the child beside her who couldn't stop swinging her feet in excitement. Alfonso leaned slightly toward her at one point and whispered, "You belong here more than anyone in this room." Lila felt her chest warm, not from flattery, but from the sincerity behind his words. When Lila's name was finally announced as the recipient of the Community Impact Award, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. The host spoke passionately about her literacy programs, her work with families, and the support network she built from nothing but determination. She rose to her feet, smoothing her dress. Mamie practically hopped beside her, grabbing her mother's hand eagerly. Alfonso stood with them, offering his support without making the moment about himself. Together, the three walked toward the stage. It was a simple sight, yet it struck Paolo with unexpected force. Alfonso's hand rested gently along Lila's back, guiding her with quiet respect. Mamie held her mother's hand proudly, almost as if presenting her to the world. And Lila, she glowed. It wasn't the glow of glamour or vanity. It was the glow of a woman who had fought her way back to herself and won. Paolo felt something inside him sink, a realization, a consequence, a loss he had not acknowledged until this very moment. Candace glanced at him, reading the shift in his expression without needing words. Lila stepped up to the podium, her heart racing, but not from nerves, from gratitude, from presence, from knowing Mamie and Alfonso stood just behind her, witnessing a moment she earned through perseverance and compassion. She looked out over the crowd, took a gentle breath, and began. Her voice carried warmth and clarity as she thanked the organization, the volunteers, the families she had worked with, and the countless children who inspired her every day. She spoke with genuine humility, acknowledging the struggles that shaped her path while celebrating the community that helped her find her purpose. Then she paused, her eyes softening. "There was a time," she said quietly, "when I believed the hardest moments in life were meant to break us. But I've learned something different. Sometimes those moments guide us. They push us to grow into the person we were always meant to become." Alfonso lowered his gaze, touched. Mamie squeezed Alfonso's finger gently. Paolo's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in an ache he had no words for. Lila continued, her voice steady. "We all have chapters we wish we could rewrite, but the beauty of life is that healing can turn even the most painful stories into beginnings." The room fell silent, and in that silence Paolo felt the weight of everything he had taken for granted. As the applause rolled through the hall and cameras flashed, Lila stepped away from the microphone, her heart full. Alfonso and Mamie joined her on stage, standing proudly beside her as the award was handed to her. The three of them looked like a family, not in name, not yet, but in the quiet bond they shared. Meanwhile, Paolo remained seated, unable to move. He looked at Lila with a mixture of admiration and grief, realizing too late that the woman he once overlooked had become someone extraordinary, someone vibrant, someone whole. Candace watched him carefully, understanding the truth he was trying to swallow. This moment wasn't about jealousy, it wasn't about longing. It was about witnessing the future Lila had created without him, and accepting that he no longer belonged anywhere in her path forward. The ceremony continued with speeches from community leaders, each one highlighting programs and individuals who had uplifted the city. Applause rose and fell in steady waves, but Paolo remained distracted. His attention drifted toward Lila no matter how hard he tried to stay focused on the stage. Every time she leaned down to whisper something to Mamie or exchanged a soft glance with Alfonso, a quiet tension pulled at his chest. What unsettled him wasn't jealousy. It was the realization that he didn't recognize this version of her. She sat with poise, engaged fully in the event, her expressions carrying a depth he had never taken the time to see. Every small interaction between her and those around her revealed how respected she was, how valued she had become. Paolo watched her in intervals, unable to look away for long. It was as though the woman he once treated as invisible had stepped into full clarity, and he was seeing her for the first time. Candace noticed his drifting, attention. She gently touched his wrist, grounding him for a moment, but even then his eyes shifted back toward Lila, as if drawn by something he couldn't name. There was no bitterness in his expression, only a quiet reckoning, a man coming to terms with truths he had avoided for far too long. When the host finally approached the microphone again and smiled at the audience, everyone sensed the anticipation building. "Our next award," she said warmly, "is the Community Impact Award." Conversations hushed instantly. The host spoke about resilience, dedication, and compassion, qualities that defined individuals who transformed lives through service rather than spotlight. Paolo listened carefully, knowing exactly who they were describing even before her name was spoken. When the host declared, "This year's award goes to Mrs. Lila Bogan," the crowd erupted in applause, strong enough to fill the room with energy. People rose to their feet. Some cheered, others whistled. The recognition was genuine, an outpouring of appreciation from those who had witnessed her influence firsthand. Paolo didn't rise immediately. He sat frozen again, but not from shock this time. The applause echoed around him while he processed the magnitude of what she had achieved. This wasn't a small honor. This was a city acknowledging the impact of a woman he once ignored, a woman who had thrived without his guidance, his approval, or his presence. Candace stood up beside him. Paolo followed, slower than the rest. While the auditorium celebrated, Alfonso stood and offered his hand to Lila with a smile filled with pride. She rose gracefully. Mamie clapped excitedly, then grabbed her mother's fingers, pulling her toward the aisle as though leading her to a grand adventure. Together, the three began their walk to the stage. Alfonso stayed just one step behind Lila, ensuring she felt supported without overshadowing her moment. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm but filled with admiration. Mamie skipped lightly at her mother's side, unaware of the emotional weight passing through the room. To her, this was simply a night to celebrate the woman she adored most. The sight of them, united, steady, glowing under the warm lights, hit Paolo with a force he didn't expect. He watched as the man beside her offered the kind of presence Paolo had never given, the kind of partnership that came from sincerity rather than obligation. Lila wasn't alone. She wasn't abandoned. She had someone who cared deeply for her, and she had a daughter who looked at her like she was the center of her world. Paolo felt an ache he hadn't known existed. Not anger, not resentment, just the weight of understanding what he had let slip through his fingers. When Lila reached the podium, the applause softened into warm anticipation. She took the award in her hands, its significance heavier than its actual weight. She glanced back at Alfonso and Mamie briefly. Both offered encouraging nods, quiet, simple, filled with affection. Lila turned to the microphone. Her voice carried gently through the room, steady yet full of emotion. She thanked the organizers first, then the volunteers who had given their time and hearts to the programs. She acknowledged the children who taught her patience and joy. She mentioned the women she supported, calling them reminders of how powerful a second chance could be. Then she paused. Her gaze swept the audience, not searching for anyone in particular, but connecting with everyone at once. "There was a time," she began softly, "when I felt like I had nothing left to offer, when the days seemed heavier than I could carry. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Sometimes hope grows quietly in places we weren't looking." Her words resonated through the hall. People leaned in, listening intently. "I learned that even when we feel shattered, we're not finished. We can rebuild. We can grow stronger. We can rediscover who we are and who we want to be. And sometimes we find people who walk beside us with kindness when we need it most." Alfonso lowered his eyes briefly, moved. Paolo inhaled sharply. Lila finished with grace, thanking the community for believing in her before she learned to believe in herself again. The auditorium erupted in applause, genuine, thunderous, heartfelt. As Lila stepped away from the podium holding her award, Mamie ran ahead to hug her legs, and Alfonso approached with a look of admiration so clear it softened the entire moment. Lila knelt to embrace her daughter, then rose to stand beside Alfonso, who gently touched her back in quiet support. Behind them, Paolo remained standing in the audience, clapping slowly, his expression filled with a truth he could no longer avoid. This wasn't a display or a performance. This was who Lila genuinely was now, a woman defined by grace, strength, and a heart capable of lifting others even when she had once struggled to lift herself. It dawned on him that the woman glowing under the lights wasn't his to admire anymore. She had stepped into a future that no longer included him. And as Alfonso and Mamie stood at her side, Paolo finally understood the full weight of what he had lost, not because Lila had changed, but because she had blossomed in the space he never gave her. Candace glanced at Paolo, recognizing the acceptance settling behind his eyes. The applause continued around them, but the only sound Paolo truly heard was the quiet acknowledgement inside himself. Lila had grown into everything he never allowed her to be. Paolo waited until the crowd thinned before approaching Lila. He stood a few paces behind her, watching as people congratulated her with warm smiles and grateful handshakes. Mamie showed her award to 2 volunteers who praised her mother proudly. Alfonso stayed near Lila's side, stepping in politely whenever someone tried to crowd her space, making sure she wasn't overwhelmed. Paolo hesitated, something he wasn't accustomed to. Confidence had been his constant companion for years, but tonight it faltered. He felt out of place approaching the woman who used to know him better than anyone. When Lila finally glanced his way, their eyes met briefly, and she offered a polite nod. Alfonso caught the silent exchange and, sensing this moment might be necessary, leaned toward Lila. "Take a moment if you need it," he said quietly. "We'll be just over there." His voice carried no jealousy, no tension, just respect. Lila exhaled softly and nodded. Once Alfonso and Mamie stepped aside, Paolo approached. He stopped in front of her and spoke in a tone far more restrained than she remembered. "Thank you for giving me a moment." His posture was careful, as though he feared stepping too close. Lila folded her hands loosely in front of her. "What can I do for you, Paolo?" Her voice wasn't cold, it was steady. Paolo looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "I wanted to say that tonight showed me something I should have understood years ago." He paused, searching for the right words. "You've grown into someone remarkable. And I don't just mean the award. I mean you." His voice carried a tone she had rarely heard from him. Humility. Lila didn't respond immediately. She let him speak, allowing the heavy pause he needed. Paolo continued, "I knew you were doing community work, but I never realized the depth of it. I never realized how much you were capable of, or how much I failed to see." A faint ache flickered across his expression, but Lila felt no vindication, only clarity. "I wasn't there for you," Paolo admitted quietly. "Not when it mattered. I wasn't the partner I should have been. I chose the wrong priorities." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained soft. "And seeing you tonight, seeing what you've built, it made me understand how deeply I underestimated you." Lila kept her gaze steady. "We were different people back then," she replied, "and you gave your energy to what you believed was important." "That's not an excuse," he murmured. "You needed someone who was present, someone who valued your heart as much as your support. I didn't do that." He swallowed, the apology forming slowly, deliberately. "I'm sorry, Lila." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. She wasn't expecting remorse, not from him. Paolo had always been a man who stepped over regret to reach his next achievement. But here he stood, stripped of titles and status, speaking like someone who finally understood consequences. Lila nodded gently. "Thank you for acknowledging." That, Paolo's shoulders lowered, as if hearing those words eased a burden he'd been carrying in silence. After a quiet moment he asked, "Are you happy?" The question wasn't posed with bitterness or a hidden plea. It was honest, so honest that Lila felt it in her chest. She looked toward Alfonso and Mamie, who were laughing together a few steps away. In their small corner of the room, it felt like light gathered naturally around them. "Yes," she answered softly. "I am." Paolo followed her gaze, taking in the sight of the man who had filled the spaces Paolo never noticed were empty. He gave a faint, sad smile, not resentful but accepting. "And with him?" Paolo asked carefully. "With myself," Lila replied first, "and he's part of that. But the happiness you're asking about, it comes from the life I built, from being present for my daughter, from finding meaning in helping others. That came before anything else." Paolo nodded slowly, understanding far more than her words conveyed. He looked down, then back at her with the sincerity that marked the closing of an old chapter. "I'm glad," he whispered. "Truly, you deserve that." His final question was one he approached with caution. "And Mamie, is she doing well?" Lila softened. She's thriving. She's surrounded by love, by community, by stability. She's growing into herself beautifully. Paolo nodded, absorbing her words as if they were both comforting and difficult to hear. I'm glad she has that, even if I wasn't the one who gave it to her. There it was, the admission, the moment of accountability. Not as a businessman, not as a husband, but as a human being. Lila gave him a small, respectful nod. Not forgiveness, not bitterness, just peace. Without another word, Paolo stepped back. He didn't reach for her. He didn't ask for another chance. He simply accepted what he had lost and what she had gained. Lila watched him walk away with a sense of finality that didn't hurt. The chapter had closed cleanly, quietly, without unraveling her progress. A few moments later, Alfonso and Mamie returned, and the relief in Lila's chest was unmistakable. Alfonso didn't ask what Paolo said. He didn't need to. He simply stood with her, offering the calm she had come to trust. And with that, Lila stepped further into her new life, one free of the shadows she once lived beneath. When Alfonso returned to Lila's side after Paolo walked away, he didn't rush her with questions or search her face for clues. He simply stood beside her in silent support, offering a gentle presence rather than explanation. Lila felt her shoulders release tension she didn't realize she'd been holding. The weight of the conversation with Paolo didn't linger as she expected. Instead, there was only clarity, calm, quiet, and deeply grounding. Alfonso glanced at her softly. You okay? His voice carried no pressure, only care. Lila nodded. I'm all right. And she meant it. The room still buzzed with conversation and celebration, yet the space around them felt peaceful. Mamie ran back to Lila, clutching the flower-shaped pin she'd been given earlier. Mommy, look, they gave me this, she chirped. Lila bent down, admiring the pin with genuine delight. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Mamie grinned, then reached up and hugged her mother's neck with all the enthusiasm her small arms could manage. As Lila rose, Alfonso stepped slightly closer, not to claim her, but to offer a subtle kind of shelter, the kind that comes from being attuned to someone's emotions. She didn't need rescuing. She just needed someone who understood how to stand with her. And Alfonso understood perfectly. The ceremony slowly wrapped up, and guests began filtering toward the exits. Lila's award was safely tucked in a velvet-lined box Alfonso carried as if it were something priceless. He didn't treat it as an object. He treated it as a reflection of her journey, and he handled it with that level of respect. Mamie tugged on her mother's skirt. Mommy, can we get ice cream, please? Lila laughed softly, her exhaustion melting into amusement. Ice cream? After 9 at night? Mamie nodded with determined enthusiasm. Alfonso stepped in with a teasing grin. I know a place that stays open late. Best chocolate swirl in town. Mamie gasped dramatically. Mommy, we have to go, Lila gave Alfonso a playful side-eye. You're teaming up with her now? He lifted a shoulder. I know a good plan when I hear one. Their light banter felt natural, as though they'd been doing it for years instead of months. Lila didn't recognize this side of herself at first, the part that laughed easily, the part that felt free to tease, to relax, to enjoy without fear of disappointing someone. There was a part of her she hadn't realized she missed. Outside, the night air was cool and comforting. Streetlights cast a soft glow across the pavement as the city hummed quietly around them. Lila walked beside Alfonso while Mamie skipped ahead, twirling her flower pin as if it were a prize from a fair. Alfonso held the award box under one arm and kept pace with Lila effortlessly. Their hands brushed occasionally, not intentionally, just through the natural rhythm of walking side by side. Each light touch sent a warmth through her that was gentle rather than overwhelming. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Alfonso spoke. You handled yourself beautifully tonight. Lila blinked. Really? I felt like my voice shook during the speech. It didn't, he assured her, and even if it had, no one would have cared. You spoke from a place most people never reach. That's what they heard. His words weren't flattery, they were truth, delivered with a softness that hit deeper than praise. Lila looked at him grateful. Thank you for everything, tonight, for being here. Alfonso stopped walking for a moment, turning toward her fully. I show up for people who matter, Lila. You matter. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart hitch, not painfully, but tenderly. When they reached the corner where Alfonso had parked, Mamie waited by the car door, still bouncing with excitement over the promised ice cream. Alfonso opened the back door for her, helping her climb in with the care of someone who respected the role he was being trusted with. Once Mamie was settled, Alfonso walked around the car to open the passenger door for Lila. He didn't do it out of formality. He did it because he wanted her to feel cared for in ways she hadn't before. Lila placed a hand on the top of the door frame and paused, meeting his eyes. Alfonso, tonight meant a lot to me. He held her gaze steadily. It meant a lot to me, too. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the silence. Their eyes lingered, communicating more than either of them tried to articulate. Affection, respect, the beginning of something steady, something lasting. Lila slid into the car, her heart oddly light. Alfonso closed the door gently, as if safeguarding something precious. On the drive home, Mamie fell asleep with her head leaning against the window, the flower pin still clutched in her hand. Lila watched her daughter for a moment before settling back in her seat. Alfonso drove with quiet confidence, the kind that made her feel safe without needing reassurances. When he pulled up in front of her apartment building, he turned off the engine and sat with his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. He looked at her with that gentle gaze she was growing accustomed to, aware, attentive, intentionally patient. "This was a good night," he said softly. "It really was," she replied. He nodded once, eyes flicking toward the sleeping child in the back seat. "Get her inside. I'll bring the award." He stepped out before she could object. Lila opened her door carefully and lifted Mamie from the back seat, holding her close as the little girl mumbled in her sleep. Alfonso followed her up the short walkway, the award held securely in his hands. At the door, Lila turned toward him once more. The porch light cast a warm glow across his face, softening his features. "Thank you, Alfonso, for everything tonight, and for everything before tonight." He smiled, small, sincere, undeniably heartfelt. "Anytime, Lila." Their goodbye wasn't dramatic. It didn't need theatrics. It was gentle, meaningful, and full of promise. Lila stepped inside her home with a quiet certainty blooming in her chest. She wasn't stepping into a new chapter alone. She was stepping into one, built on peace, support, and a love that was beginning to grow without force. A love that didn't rush. A love that didn't demand. A love that simply existed. If Lila's journey touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of courage, healing, and second chances. There are moments in life when progress feels slow, uneven, and uncertain. Lila knew those moments well. Healing didn't arrive in one triumphant sweep. It came in small, steady steps. Some days she felt strong, and other days she felt like she was barely moving at all. But every quiet choice she made, choosing peace, choosing growth, choosing to show up for herself, carried her forward more than she realized. Her journey reminded everyone watching that real strength isn't loud, it's patient. It's built through the tiny acts of courage we make on days when hope feels faint. Healing isn't a straight line, and it doesn't need to be. Every step still counts. Walking away from a life she once believed was permanent was one of the hardest decisions Lila ever made. It didn't feel like bravery at the time. It felt like stepping off a cliff with no guarantee of a safe landing. But leaving wasn't quitting. It was choosing herself for the first time in years. Choosing her well-being. Choosing her dignity. Choosing the kind of life she wanted her daughter to grow up in. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is walk away from the places where their spirit is shrinking. Lila learned that leaving isn't a sign of weakness. It's often the very moment someone starts to reclaim who they truly are. When Alfonso entered her life, Lila discovered something she had almost forgotten. Love should never hurt to hold. It should never make a person feel small or unseen. True affection is gentle. It supports rather than consumes. It nurtures rather than drains. Alfonso didn't overwhelm her with grand gestures or promises. He showed up in ways that made her feel safe. He listened. He respected her pace. He made space for her voice. Through him, Lila learned that real love doesn't demand that someone lose themselves. It helps them grow into the best version of who they're meant to be. Lila's marriage taught her another truth. Status, comfort, and financial security cannot replace presence. A home filled with wealth can still feel cold if the people inside it don't truly connect. Paolo provided a lifestyle that many envied, but he wasn't there when she needed him most. A partner's absence can leave deeper scars than any argument ever could. Lila's life proved that emotional support has more value than any luxury. A strong relationship is built through attention, empathy, and shared moments, not grand purchases or outward success. Becoming a mother changed Lila, but it didn't erase her identity. It didn't remove her dreams or diminish her worth. Too often, women are told they must choose between raising a child and pursuing their own goals. Lila refused to accept that. She learned to balance both, not perfectly, but with heart. Through her volunteer work and community programs, she showed Mamie that motherhood is not the end of personal growth. In fact, it can be the beginning of discovering capabilities you never knew you had. Lila taught her daughter by example that dreams don't disappear just because responsibilities increase. They simply evolve. As Paolo offered his apology, Lila realized something essential. Closure doesn't arrive when someone finally admits their mistakes. It arrives when you stop depending on their acknowledgement to move forward. She didn't need Paolo's remorse to validate her growth. Her closure had been built through each choice she made to rise, to rebuild, and to open her heart again. His apology only confirmed what she already knew, that she no longer carried the weight of the past. Closure was something she had already achieved long before he found the words. Happiness that grows from one's own strength cannot be taken away. Lila's new life wasn't handed to her, she created it with determination, late nights, early mornings, and countless moments of self-reflection. She found fulfillment in serving her community, in raising Mamie with intention, and in building a life grounded in authenticity rather than appearance. That kind of happiness isn't fragile. It isn't tied to another person's approval. It rises from within, and because of that, it remains steady even when life shifts unexpectedly. Love that arrives later in life carries a certain clarity. By the time Alfonso entered her world, Lila knew who she was, what she valued, and what she refused to tolerate. She didn't fall for charm or promises. She connected with his character, his steadiness, his sincerity. Their bond grew not from haste, but from understanding. Love found after hardship carries wisdom. It is intentional, it is chosen. And for Lila, it was more beautiful than anything she had experienced before, not because it was perfect, but because she finally felt ready to receive it. Weeks after the ceremony, the rhythms of Lila's life fell back into place, but something inside her had shifted. The recognition she received didn't swell her ego. Instead, it strengthened her sense of purpose. Her literacy center welcomed new families every week, and her support gatherings continued to grow. Yet amid all the progress, she found herself thinking often of the night when Alfonso stood behind her as the crowd applauded, a memory that warmed her each time it surfaced. One weekend evening, he called and asked if she and Mamie were free for a small outing. His voice carried its usual steadiness, but there was an undertone of excitement she hadn't heard before. Lila agreed, and the next day he picked them up and drove toward the pier as the sun began dipping toward the horizon. Mamie pressed her face against the window, mesmerized by the cotton candy sky unfolding above the water. When they reached the boardwalk, the gentle breeze carried the scent of the sea and the soft chatter of families enjoying the evening. The three of them walked along the pier, their footsteps tapping lightly against the wooden planks. The waves rolled beneath them, glistening under the fading light. Lila felt an ease she had never experienced in her previous life, an ease born not of escape, but of genuine peace. They reached the far edge of the pier, where the sunset looked like it had been painted across the sky, in wide strokes of gold and amber. Mamie ran ahead to lean against the railing, humming happily as she watched the boats drift by. Alfonso stood beside Lila, hands loosely in his pockets, posture relaxed. "She really loves the ocean," he murmured, glancing at Mamie. "She does," Lila replied fondly. "I think it makes her feel free." "And you?" he asked gently. "Does it do the same for you?" Lila looked out over the water, the breeze catching loose strands of her hair. It does now, she said softly. There was a time when I felt trapped, like my life had been arranged around someone else's needs, but now, I finally feel like I'm choosing my path. Alfonso turned slightly toward her, admiration in his gaze. You've built something meaningful, Lila, more than most people build in a lifetime. She smiled, humbled. I'm just trying to be the kind of person I needed back then. You've become that and more, he said quietly, not just for others, but for yourself. His words settled into her heart with a warmth she couldn't deny. A comfortable silence settled between them, as the sky deepened into a blend of purple and soft orange. Mamie continued humming, occasionally waving at seagulls swooping above the water. Lila leaned lightly against the railing, watching the horizon stretch endlessly before her. Alfonso stood close, his presence familiar and comforting. After a moment, he shifted slightly, choosing his words with care. Lila, he began, I've been wanting to ask you something, not to rush anything, not to complicate your life, but because I value honesty. She turned to him, giving him her full attention. Where do you see yourself a year from now? He asked. I mean, in terms of your life, your work, your peace. What do you imagine when you think of your future? The question wasn't demanding, it was hopeful. It wasn't about him claiming a place in her world. It was about understanding if she wanted him in it. Lila inhaled softly, letting the wind settle her thoughts. I see myself in a home filled with laughter, she said. Someplace calm, someplace where Mamie can grow and feel supported. A space where kindness is the foundation, not an afterthought. Alfonso nodded slowly, absorbing each word. And who do you see beside you there? He asked, voice quiet but sincere. Lila's eyes softened as she looked at him. She wasn't uncertain. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't holding back out of habit or old wounds. For once her heart felt steady enough to speak the truth without hesitation. You, she whispered. The single word carried more meaning than an entire speech. It held gratitude, affection, trust, and the beginnings of something deeper, something neither of them needed to name just yet. Alfonso exhaled slowly, relief washing over his features. He lifted a hand, brushing a loose curl away from her cheek in a simple, tender gesture that made her breath still. Then he leaned forward slightly, their foreheads touching gently, sharing a moment that felt like a quiet promise. Not rushed, not uncertain, not fragile, just real. Behind them, Mamie giggled. Mommy, are you doing the head hug? Lila laughed softly, stepping back just enough to scoop her daughter into her arms. Alfonso laughed with them, the sound deep and warm. As the sun dipped fully beneath the horizon and the first stars appeared above the water, the three of them stood on the pier, united not by obligation, but by choice. Lila felt something she hadn't felt in years, true contentment. This moment wasn't about awards, regrets, or old shadows. It wasn't about proving herself or reclaiming what had been lost. It was about stepping forward with clarity, supported by someone who saw her for who she truly was, and with a daughter whose joy reminded her daily why she fought so hard to rebuild. She had walked through heartbreak. She had rebuilt her life, piece by piece. And now, she had found peace, companionship, and the promise of a love that didn't demand she shrink to fit it. Her story wasn't ending, it was just beginning, a beginning she chose, a beginning she earned, a beginning she stepped into with her head held high.